I love writing my content in Markdown, but there are a few things that Markdown doesn't do that I kind of need it to do to make my site look just the way that I want it. So we're going to extend Markdown. We're going to hook into the Markdown rendering process, add a few hooks, do some magic, and that way we can end up with this, which I think is pretty good. We have a little blade component here. We have some nice syntax highlighting, and then I'll show you one or two other things that may take your Markdown experience or your reading experience to the next level and allow you to solidify some best practices on your website. Let's start by looking at the composer.json. I'm using this Graham Campbell Markdown package, which is just kind of a thin wrapper around the league's Commonmark package. Commonmark is actually doing all the work, but this Markdown package is like a Laravel adapter, and it also gives us this Markdown configuration file. So in your config, you have this markdown.php, and the place that we are going to hang out is in this extensions array. So you can see I'm using a few of the first party extensions, but we're going to start writing some of our own stuff in here. So without all of the extensions, this is what it looks like locally. There's no syntax highlighting. There's no blade compilation. There's really nothing going on. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the Torchlight extension and Commonmark v2 Torchlight extension. Torchlight is a syntax highlighting library that I wrote that turns it into this. So I think this is already a lot better. That's one of the really nice things about Markdown is a lot of packages have Markdown or Commonmark extensions that'll take your, for example, code from ugly to really pretty. And you can do lots of neat things like add these little highlight or focus areas. And if you want, you can have light and dark mode. So I should have warned you before I switched that, but there you go. So we've already added a third-party extension. What would you call that? A second party? We're going to write our own extension. I don't know if that's second party or not. I don't know what second party is. First, second, or third party, who knows? But here's what we're going to do. This right here, that's supposed to be a blade component. If we inspect that, you'll see that is xtweet, and the browser didn't know what to do with it, so it didn't do anything with it, and it just output the slot in the middle. We need to get this to run through the blade parsing or blade rendering pipeline, and right now it doesn't. So the way that we're putting this on the page is we've got post blade here, and if we just dd this view, all we're doing is we're just including that markdown file in a layout called post. And so if we refresh that, you'll see this is the name. This is the name of that file, and then the blade process is picking up that file and rendering it as markdown, not as blade. So one thing that we could do, instead of saying include view, is we could, if we wanted, and I don't think this is a good idea, we could say view make view render. So that's kind of doing the exact same thing. So if we put all that out to the browser, you'll see we're right back where we started, but now we have this as a string. And so will that still work? Yes, that'll still work. So now that we have this view as a string, we could say, let's go ahead and use blade to render that view, and something went wrong. Well, here's why we're not going to do this. Let me show you. Let's rendering components in Markdown. Let's get rid of everything in here. We'll get rid of all of that and see if that works. Okay, that worked. So something is wrong with our content such that when we run it through Blade, Blade freaks out and says, I don't know what's going on here. What was the error? The error was unexpected end if. So let's scroll down here, and this is valid Blade, but I was writing it as a code block in my content. So that's why we don't want to run Blade over HTML that has been generated from Markdown, because if your Markdown includes valid Blade, Blade is going to try to run it. So if we check back here and we say @end if, Blade is looking at that and saying, great, I know what to do with @end if. I'm going to try to close the if statement. It's like, there's no if statement. This is actually content. That's kind of a bad case scenario. It's super annoying. Your site's going to break. But a worst case scenario is somebody figures out that you're doing this on user generated content and they think, All right, well, now I have keys to the kingdom. Let me show you how that works. So coming back over here, let's say I'm writing an article for your very fancy website that I realize is running Blade on my output. And I say, that's interesting. Let's just we'll call this text. And what if I were to say that, what do I want to see? File, get contents of base path. Let me look at your .env. And since you're running Blade on that, surprise, surprise, there's your env file. It's over. You lose, game over. Thanks for playing. So instead of doing this naive and potentially devastating thing of running Blade over the output of a Markdown rendering process, we're not doing that. Instead, we're going to hook in to the Markdown rendering process and muck about with the abstract syntax tree and do stuff a lot more safer and a lot more in control. There are two approaches we could take. One is remove all of the code blocks from the document, run Blade over what's left over, and put the code blocks back. It's pretty good, pretty safe. The other one is we can take all of the code blocks out, treat those as Blade themselves, render that, and then put that content back in. The second one is where we're going to start. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create our own extension. So if we look in the Markdown here, you'll see you can register all of your extensions. We need to create our own. We're going to put it in here. This Commonmark library is very good. It's very, very good. It is very best practices. So there are tons of interfaces, tons of things you can't touch, but we can kind of figure it out. So we're going to write a code renderer extension, and we'll say that this extension implements, what is it? It's I think it's an extension interface and a node renderer interface. Yes. So we'll add those method stubs, and the first thing we need to do is we need to register whatever we want with the environment. So when the Commonmark environment is booting up and saying, all right, let's put everything together, you need to say, hey, I got something for you. The thing that we have in this case is two different renderers, one for fenced code and one for indented code. Two different things, kind of the same thing, just two different ways to write code. And what we're going to do is we're going to say the renderer is actually this very class. So anytime you have either one of these, call this class and we'll accept it into this render function. And we're going to set the priority pretty high because we want to be in charge. I'm the captain now. So when it comes time to render one of these two classes or these two block types, we're going to drop in here. And before we do anything interesting, we're just going to dump it out. And if we go to Markdown and we say, hey, I have a class now, and if you can remember the name, it is code renderer extension. Sometimes the brain, you know? And if you go back to the browser, hey, it worked. Thanks, Vite. Vite auto reloaded. Here we go. This is the first code block on the page. We can verify that by looking at the code and changing this code block to say foobar. And if we come back here, foobar. So now we are in control. We have access to the blocks as they're being rendered. Why is this helpful? Not helpful for this, right? We don't need this part because this is actually code I want to put on the page. The thing that I am looking for is I need this to actually turn into Blade, not to be rendered as Blade. I need it to turn into Blade. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this magic annotation that does nothing. This does nothing, but this is what we're going to do. What do you want to call it? You want to call it literal? Let's call it parse. So this is our shorthand, you and me, us. This is our shorthand for saying, hey, I am going to write this as a code block, but in fact, run it as Blade. I'm actually going to change it to HTML so that I get more syntax highlighting there. But parse this as Blade. Now we got to figure out, how do we do that? Well, here we are in the render function, and we can look at this and say, oh, the info is HTML plus parse. Perhaps that's a good thing to look for. So if you're at the head of the class, you already know where this is going. We're going to take the code blocks. We're going to see if it has that extra little plus parse on there. And if so, we're going to run the literal content through Blade and put that back in. So what do you want to do first? The first thing I think I want to do is I want to hint what this is. So if we say that var node is an instance of indented code or fenced code, we can then dd node get literal, and there we go. That is the literal content, which is a good start. So we can, we don't need to do anything with that. The other thing that we need to look for is what was info. So I wonder if there's a get info words. Hey, that's a good start too. So now we have the plus parse. So let's pull this guy out and say that info equals that. And I wonder if indented code, I don't think indented code would have info words, would it? No, indented code is simply indented instead of 3 backticks. So in fact, we don't need this indented code, and we can just say that that is fenced code. So if in array, the needle that we're looking for is plus, oh my goodness, parse, the haystack is info, and like every developer. Perfect. So now we're here. If in array, so if it has this magical plus parse info word, we're going to return blade render the literal. And I don't actually know how we bail out. Maybe we just return null. So, hey, look at that. That's a blade component. That totally worked. So we know that that's us, because if we returned hey, but instead we're gonna run that literal through, and you see it's got all this nice stuff, and I can click on it, and that's great. And it looks like if we return null, so if we don't return anything at all, which is either null or void, it just passes on to the next renderer, and so Torchlight still gets to pick up the rest of these and do its thing on those. So we did it. That was it. That's all we have to do. I like this method because I like being explicit about what blade is going to be run. I also like seeing the syntax highlighting and not worrying about indentation in Markdown when I'm writing HTML, but this is still not super safe from user-generated content. And if I were to load this extension and then let somebody else write Markdown, they could potentially do the exact same thing. So we're going to add one more safety feature to this method. The safety feature that we're going to add is we're going to say, let's say, public static, what do you want to call it? Allow blade for next parse or next document. And we're going to start by turning this off. So allow blade for next document. And if not static, allow blade for next document, we're just gonna return. In fact, we can just do that right up here. And so now we should see this go back to unparsed. Yeah, it's just code now. So now instead of parsing it as blade, it's just code. And what we want to do is in our view controller, where I know that I'm pulling it off the disk and it's not something that somebody else has generated, we can say code renderer extension allow true. And if we hop back over here, great. So now if I had two separate places in my application where I'm rendering Markdown, one is user-generated content, one is errand-generated content, I can just turn it on for the errand-generated content. The other thing that we need to do is we need to turn it back off, and we could do that by adding an event listener for the document rendered event, and this is going to run after the document has been rendered. And we can create a public function on document rendered event and do static allow equals false. So down here, we're just going to turn it back off, and that's not right. Allow blade for next document. There we go. So now we turn it on in our controller when we're certain that it's not user-generated content, and then we turn it off after that document has been run. That way it doesn't leak if you're using something like Octane. That one was pretty easy, but you need to brace yourself because it's about to get a lot more complicated. We're going to look at the second method. Instead of pulling the code blocks out, seeing if they're special and running blade over them, we're going to pull all of the code blocks out, run blade over the remaining document, and then put the code blocks back in. I don't love this method, I'll be honest. It's kind of cool. It does allow you to write blade inline in your Markdown instead of doing the weird code block thing. I don't know, man. But I'll show you how we're going to do it. So the first thing we need to do is create a new extension. So instead of calling this code renderer extension, let's call this one blade renderer extension. We're going to call this blade renderer extension. We're going to go back to Markdown and just turn it on immediately. Blade renderer extension. That's good. And now let's come back over here. Implements extension interface. I think that might be the only one we need for this guy. In the register method, we're going to add two event listeners. We're going to add an event listener for document parsed. And so that's before, that is, it's been turned into an AST, an abstract syntax tree, before anything really interesting happens. And then we're going to add one for document rendered, and that's after it comes out as HTML. So we're gonna run this one last. So after everything else has been parsed, we want to grab a hold of it, and then we're gonna run this one. We're gonna give this a little bit higher priority. So after everything has been rendered, then we're gonna run our guy. So let's create these. Public function on parsed. I think that accepts something, but I don't remember what right now. Public function on document rendered. Add event listener. I actually don't remember how to find this. I bet this will tell me if the signatures mismatch. No, it doesn't yet, but that's okay. So if we say DD here, great, we are here. So here's the theory here. We're going to walk the document as an AST, look for code nodes, pull them out, leave a UUID, render that document or parse that document through Blade, and then put the code nodes back in. That should keep us safe from running Blade over content that is actually supposed to be just a code block. So I think I remembered what goes here. We have the document parsed event, I believe. So if we dump out the event and we hop over here, there's the document parsed event, and we have the document. That is what we're looking for. So we'll say event get document iterator, and I think that's as node. So then if we'll do for each as node, and then we do dump node, and is that right? Yes, we have the first. Let's just dump them all out to see what we're working with here. I didn't really like that. Yeah, that's going to be too much. So if we say if this instance, we'll just say is code node, then if not, continue. If so, something. Oh man, that was bad. Something. So hop down here and we'll say protected function is code node, and we want to return node instance of fenced code, or node instance of, what's another one? Indented code, or node instance of inline code. Maybe just code. Is that right? Yeah, inline code, cool. All right, those are the three types of blocks that could contain code. We're gonna pull it out and leave a UUID instead. Let's do that. Let's generate our UUID. ID equals string UUID to string. Great, and now we're gonna say replacement equals new HTML block type 6. We're just gonna leave a block element in there, and we're gonna set the literal content to, what do you wanna say? Let's just make up some sort of replacement ID. It doesn't matter. We know what we're looking for. And we'll say node replace. I think let's just tell it that node is fenced code. That's close enough. And we'll say, is it replace with? Yes, it is replace with our replacement. And now if we hit this back in the browser, here we go. Now we've pulled out every single code block, including inline code blocks, and we've left a UUID in its place. I do want to go ahead and render those code blocks before we stash them away. So let's come up here and let's say public rendered equals this, and I think it's probably going to want me to make that an array. That's fine. I'm okay with that. And we'll say that this rendered ID equals, I think it's new HTML renderer, not that one, renderer, Commonmark renderer. And what does it accept? It accepts an environment. So we need to stash the environment at the top, which we can do. So while we're in our register, we can say that this environment equals environment. So what we're doing is we're just stashing that environment. We're saying I am going to use that later because you didn't give that to me down there. So if we're going to be a good type boy, let's be a good type boy. Environment, that one probably. Great. So we're going to pass the environment into this HTML renderer, and let's see what affordances we have here. Render nodes as an iterable, and that's fine. We'll just pass in our node. So let's just go ahead and dump that out and see what that actually looks like before we think that we've done the right thing. Hey, there you go. syntax highlighted by torchlight.dev. So what we did is we took that code node out and we ran it through the rest of all of the renderers, and then we stashed it away as a public property on this class, and we'll put it back later. So we're getting pretty close. We can get rid of this, and that is all we need to do in the parsed event. Now we need to come back to the rendered event, and we'll say that this accepts a document rendered event, and what does this give us? Event get output. Huh, that seems pretty nice. Let's see if we're actually here first, make sure that we're all working. Yep, that's there. And let's dump this out. So that gives us a, that gives us a rendered content, but that's what we're looking for right there. We're looking for the content, and you can see our placeholders are in there. So that is pretty close. So it looks like the output gives us a rendered content. So rendered content get, yeah, that's probably right. So content equals that, and then we're gonna run blade render that content. And so now content equals blade render that content. So everything that we've written in Markdown is now going to be rendered. So that's a pretty good start. And what can we do here? Event replace output. That's great. Replace output. What does it need? A rendered content interface. New rendered content. Hey. Document and string. So we're going to take the event get document, get output, get document. Great. And our new string is content. So what we've done, we have listened to that event. Sometimes it's random how I format, but it's always very good. We have listened to this document rendered event. We've pulled the content off of it, which is HTML at this point. We've rendered that HTML through Blade. Remember that we removed the code blocks before, and now we're saying, hey, I've got new output for you. The new output is the same document. However, here's the new content. So if we hit this in the browser, we'll see, nice. We're kind of back to where we started, except if we go back to the actual Markdown and we come up here and we remove that guy. Now look, now we have a Blade component. In fact, what's wild is you have all of Blade. So instead of rendering curly braces 1, it just rendered the 1, because now we are running Blade over this entire thing. Of course, the last thing we need to do is we now need to swap our code blocks back in for those UUIDs, and honestly, that's pretty easy. So we need to do that after the blade has been rendered. So we'll say for each this rendered as ID and content. Remember, we rendered the code blocks up here, so it's already run through the syntax highlighting and everything. Not as content, that's a bad idea. As ID and rendered, that's probably a better idea. And then down here, we're gonna say content equals string replace search for search, replace on content. So we need to build up an array of search and an array of replace. And what is our little shorthand? We did this replacement. I kind of like replace better. Replace. So that's what we're searching for. So we can say that search equals this guy, but in fact, sometimes Markdown is weird and it just does it like this, and I don't like it when it has these extra paragraph tags. So we're gonna add 2. Search equals that, and search equals that. So we'll replace it if Markdown wrapped it in paragraph tags, or if Markdown didn't wrap it in paragraph tags. And so we have the equal number replace equals rendered, and replace equals rendered. Now, this should be, we can just dump that out, search and replace. So if we hit that, there's all of our search. We're searching for all of those IDs, and we're replacing it with the actual rendered code. So you can see some are Torchlight and some are just inline code blocks, and that feels right to me. There you go. We've pulled the code blocks out, we've rendered the entire document, and then passed it through Blade, and then we've put the code blocks back in, and we're pretty safe. So what we're safe from here is writing valid Blade in code blocks. That's not going to mess us up. What we're not safe from is users writing valid Blade in their Markdown, because like we looked at, it's going to render valid Blade in Markdown. So again, you could set up your static flag to say allow for the next document, or don't allow for the next document. That's fine. But now you've seen the 2 different ways that we can do this. The last thing I'm going to show you is using Markdown to, I don't even, maybe enforce some business best practices. Like maybe it would be a good thing to put a newsletter sign up in the middle of your articles. That sounds like a good idea. Maybe it would be a good thing to say, hey, I've got more articles like this. You should click here to read them. Sounds like a good idea. Maybe it would be a good idea to like advertise your course in the middle of one of your articles. Are you going to do any of that? Probably not, but what if the computer did it for you? So I'm going to show you how I write an advertisement for Torchlight and put it underneath the code block automatically. And then I'll show you how you can add a newsletter subscription form above a header and do it automatically. First thing we need to do is we need to create a new extension. We're pretty good at this by now. We'll call this one the Torchlight Add Extension. And we will say that this implements the extension interface. I think that's all we need here. And let's hop back over here and we'll say Torchlight Add Extension. And all right, let's get started. The only thing we're going to do here is we're going to say environment add event listener for the document parsed event. And what do we want to do? We want to handle it with this on document parsed. So we're going to stay in this class and we'll just do a public function on document parsed, and that receives the document parsed event. And we're going to hop down here. Now what we're going to do, we are going to do the same thing we've already done. We're going to loop through here, event get document iterator as node, and we're going to check to see, in this case, we're going to check to see only if it's a fenced node. So if not, instance of, if not node, instance of fenced code, then just continue. Otherwise, if it is an instance of a fenced code, what do we want to do? Let's create a new add block. Let's just call it add. I like the one word. Add equals new HTML block. And we'll say it's an HTML block 6 block element. And the add, we will set literal of, hey, check out Torchlight. That seems good. Now, this node is a fenced code at this point, so we can just say node is fenced code, and that will give us the hints that we need. Node, I think it's insert, let's do insert after, and we're going to insert our add after the fenced code block, and let's see what that did. That didn't do anything. Oh, sure it did. Hey, check out Torchlight. It kind of worked. That's exactly what we're looking for. It added the HTML after the code block, and it added it after every code block, which is a little much. So let's fix that real fast. So instead of adding it after every block, let's come up here and let's just put a, let's just say public count equals 0. And here we'll say this count plus plus. And if we, let's do, what do you want to say? Let's say if this count is not equal to 1 and this count is not equal to, pick a random number, 6, that seems good, then continue. Otherwise, add this, and I'm going to make this HTML a little bit prettier. I'm going to add a bunch of tailwind and add an actual, like, hey, the code was highlighted by this. So then we can put the HTML in there. So now what we're doing is we're going to continue to loop through, incrementing the count each time. If the count is not 1 or the count is not 6 and I don't know, and the count is not 6, then carry on. Otherwise, put this add in there. Let's take a look at this add now. Code highlighting powered by torchlight.dev. So that is block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Code highlighting powered by torchlight.dev. Now, that's on every single post that I have ever created, and I didn't have to do a single thing, right? Let's look at how we can add this to maybe right before your second H2 or something. This is probably a more applicable use case. We're gonna actually look for headings instead of fenced code blocks. And we're actually only going to look for H2s. So we'll say get level not equal to, then in that case, continue on. So now we're looking for headings, and that level of the heading needs to be level 2. And that means we found one. And let's say we actually only want to put it before the second one. We don't want to put it before the first H2. And that will be the case there. Now we're in a good spot down here where it can infer that that is a heading. And right here, instead of saying that, we can say, please sign up for my newsletter. It is very good. And we'll make that, what do you want to do? We'll make that text large, get rid of that, and get rid of that, add a P4, none of this matters. Add a P4 and a BG gray 800. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Now, instead of inserting after the H2, which would feel weird, we can just say insert before H2. And if we check the browser, and so this is the first, let's just look for it. Please sign, there you go. So now we're all the way down here. This is the second H2, parse only code blocks. Here it is right here. And I can say, please sign up for my newsletter. It is very good. Now, this is good, right? It's not great. I would design it a little better. This is good, but the best part is this is on every single article now. So if you're doing something, please go watch my latest video on YouTube, and you can link to that. So now every time you have something that should go on every single article, and maybe in the middle of the article, or maybe you want to do something special with images, you can walk these ASTs, you can parse this markdown, walk through it, and do whatever you want across everything on your site for fun and for hopefully profit. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. I'll talk to you next time. See ya.